Hello there, the name's Neenal, and I am extremely poor. Yes indeedy, the only thing that I have to my name are the clothes upon my back. Uh-oh. I've been robbed. Yeah, sometimes that's just how it goes when you're living in the big city, which coincidentally just so happens to be where I live. Well, more specifically, I live out here on the streets. Now, I'm going to level with you here, the city can be a dangerous and vile place to live, but the local military normally has things locked down pretty tight for the most part. This is the Republic of Libertas, a former Rebel Alliance union that is now their own nation. They are simply one of many nations on the planet of Degum, but I am a Thromboian, and they are the least racist. Oh darn, it appears to have started raining, and here I am, buck naked. Even worse so, I'm very hungry. Yet another problem with being broke is a joke here in the city. Never enough food to go around, it would seem. Lucky for me, though, I just so happen to know where some of the local farmers grow their crops. And if we don't take too many of them, the turret won't even notice. Now, I'm not normally one to steal, but when it's between this and starving. Now that our belly is full of onions, though, we need to find a nice, dry place to sleep for the night. Alleyways aren't exactly the most safe place to sleep at night, but we don't exactly have the Taj Mahal out here. The sun is up, and as am I. Today's the day, my friends. I am going to get my life together. I am tired of living like this, and most importantly, I'm tired of not having any damn money. I'm going to set off on my own, and I'm going to leave this city behind. The vicious cycle ends today. It ends with me here. Well, not here, you know what I mean. We're actually going to be doing a bit of traveling away from the city into the forest. In these small hills here, we shall set up our own home and make our fortune. This tea in the road felt like the perfect place in case we decide to do some type of business, as there are definitely plenty of potential customers traveling this way. An absolutely gorgeous place as well. It was nice to finally get away from the hustle and bustle of the concrete jungle for once. Yes, indeed, it is nice to be out in nature, but even so, if we're going to make our fortune here, we are going to need some man-made structures. I thought that this small Y and or T in the road, depending on how you look at it, would be the perfect place for us to set up shop here with a business. So I began mining away at a gigantic boulder. Now you may be asking yourself what kind of business, and truth be told, I don't really know yet. But I do know we don't have a singular penny to our name, so we're not going to be able to purchase any resources to build it, and thus we will use the most abundant resource of wood. Not long after that, we ended up having our first visitors, a fella by the name of Jur, who was from the United Traders, who was of course looking to do some trading, and his security man. Unfortunately, I didn't have a business set up at all yet, and I also didn't have anything that they would be willing to purchase off of me, so I just kind of went about my merry little way. As the sun began to set, I realized it was going to be quite dark soon and also quite cold, so I worked on a campfire. I would also begin collecting some food before bed, that way I don't have to go out into the dark where there may be some predators lurking. I ended up cooking myself a couple of meals, one for now and one for in the morning, just before I ended up going to sleep. A fella could get used to a nice calm place like this. We are roughing it here, and it's not exactly the Taj Mahal, but before too long we'll make this place our own. Speaking of which, the very next day we immediately began using up all the wood that we had to begin building our very first business and or structure. While doing so though, we were being hunted by a red panda that had lost its mind. Nino rushed to a nearby woodpile, picked up a large log, and beat it over the head until we ended up killing it. For the rest of the night we would continue working on our little business building here, but it began getting dark again, and so we would build Nino a proper bed in a safe place. Now, you may have noticed that I am being a little bit vague with what the structure is actually going to be and or what our business is going to be. I believe it's going to be something of a diner at some point. As for right now, possibly just a little meeting spot, kind of like a saloon or a bar, except, you know, we're in modern times. We'll throw it together for now and see what it evolves into over time, I suppose. But we are going to need some food if we're going to try to sell any food to people, so we began planting plenty of rice, as it was the fastest and easiest to raise. But we're going to need to also be able to refrigerate all the meals that we end up making, and thus we're going to need some form of power generation, and thus we are also going to be mining plenty of components and steel for that before we try to throw together a wood-fired generator. But all of our construction efforts ended up being halted when we had our very first raid. It would seem a singular outlander, a devious ne'er-do-well, has come to try and chop our head off and take any money that we have, as he's thinking that this is a nice business he can rob. Little does he know that we don't have any money, and we're gonna kick his ass. For you see, my friends, as mentioned previously, Nino is a Thromboian, and being a Thromboian also gives us the ability of Thromboian Fury. Essentially, we can pump some type of adrenaline through our veins on a whim. This will give us quite the combat advantage in melee combat, even when our opponent has an axe and we only have a log, making it quite easy to defeat them. We bonked him over the head a few times with the old log and he hit the ground. I decided to try to start tending to his wounds so that we might be able to rehabilitate him, but unfortunately he tried to stand back up and Nino ended up killing him. Ah, that's on him. His loss. He could have been some type of hotel and or bar security or something of that sort, and now he's dead. Shame on you. However, in his will, he ended up leaving us a nice axe and a nice brewski that we could enjoy at our very own bar. So I guess it wasn't a total loss that he died. Now that the peace has been restored, we could also finally finish up our wood-fired generator and get our lights going for our little dining room as well as our bedroom. It was a nice start having our little business in the Y in the road here, but we still have much work to do, and that's going to require a lot of steel components and wood, which we would humbly begin collecting for the next couple of days or so. This is probably as good a time as any to also tell you if you're interested in the mods that I'm using, please check the video description as there is a link to the mod list on the workshop. Now that we have quite the little stockpile of the previously mentioned resources, we would begin working on 6 guest rooms. Since so many people frequently travel these roads, I thought it might be a good idea for us to turn this place into something of an inn and or a motel. A nice little guest stop with plenty of beds and food for people of any and all factions to stay at. For our food storage though, we would end up converting Nino's bedroom into a nice little freezer, and we ended up building him a very small cabin to stay in instead. And of course, if we're going to be trying to feed all these people to make some money off of them as well, we can't be cooking all of our meals on a campfire, so we built ourselves a nice little stove along with some vending machines where we could actually store this food. The vending machines will allow us to store food inside as well as drinks, and whenever someone wants one, it's just like a normal vending machine where they have to pay to get the item. This will help us maximize our monetary efforts, because if we have some guests traveling through who don't want to stay the night but they're feeling a bit peckish, they might be willing to spend some silver on it. And just like that, we have our very first guest. It would seem some visitors from the Oak Foundation are coming from the west. We don't currently have any visitor beds available, so they communicated with us first, which I'm glad they did, because that then gave us the opportunity to make sure all of our rooms were ready. Not only would we allow this beautiful man here to have a nice place to sleep, but we could also ensure that we made him pay a good price for it, if you know what I'm saying. You may think of it as upcharging, but $10 for a night in a bed seems like a pretty ideal situation to me, even if they aren't exactly the best accommodations, of course. The Oak Foundation and its members are normally pretty secretive, so we were sure to only greet the gentleman after he had entered his room so that we may gather the payment. He was nice enough, I suppose, but something tells me he's on an interesting mission here. Charges like those are normally for demolishing buildings, but I have a feeling he's not going to be using them on us here. With he, just as any guest, we would make it priority 1 to see to his every need and comfort. With my hope being, of course, he might leave us a very good tip or perhaps purchase some more food. Well, while the secret agent man is enjoying his stay in our nice facilities, we began working on some new structures to help us out, such as a storage room. As we continue to expand our business, the demand for resources is always going to be exponentially growing, and thus I need a safe place to store them to ensure that they don't deteriorate. After telling the gentleman about our tale of woe of being homeless and living in the city and our ambitious plans here with our business, he ended up offering to join us. And the best part is, it wouldn't even upset his home faction, as he would be joining us as an ambassador from the Oak Foundation, whatever that means. Nino is a bit naive, you could say, in terms of being a business owner, and he really needed the help, so we allowed him to join us here. Welcome aboard, pal. I suppose you could be the ambassador and maybe head of security, since you're the only one here with a firearm. Jor recommended that we give the business a proper name, as well as our faction. I won't lie, I was a little bit stumped on this at first as to what we should name it, but I decided to call it the Independent Hamlets Incorporated. That would be our faction and or corporation name, while the facility here itself would be Hamlet Crossing Headquarters. This of course is our first facility, and thus will be our headquarters, and then of course the crossing with the proximity to the road. Hamlet has something of a cozy feeling to me, with it being described as a small settlement, one that is actually smaller than a village itself, and it seems just, I don't know, kind of like cottage, right? Very cozy in my opinion, and thus why I chose the word for our corporation. To me, it just seems like a really good name for a hotel chain or something, which we may end up accomplishing. We may have found it a bit hard to trust Jor at first, but after I got a good look at his skill set, I was pretty intrigued, as he's great with animals and has a minor passion in many other skills, so he can improve them quite quickly. Plus, he has a standard issued firearm from his previous faction, which would be great for protection and also perfect for hunting purposes as well. We began throwing together a small little cabin for him to stay in as well, just as we had for Ninal. Now, I do want to say that I was making these quite tiny at first, that way we could use most of our wood and steel on some proper rooms and facilities for the guest. Speaking of which, we ended up having a low-wage worker from the Blue Rock settlements coming to stay here. I was a bit worried that she might not spend any money since she's a low-wage worker. She seemed like a sweet old lady, and by golly, she sure was, as she was paying up to 12 silver per meal. Awful kind of you, madam. But we were still facing a bit of an issue. As you can see, Nino is, well, he's naked, and his nudity can be a little bit off-putting to the guest. And thus, because of this, we would have Jor whip up some tribal wear that he could make out of the plain leather from hunting all those deer. Ah, now that is much more approachable. Not exactly a suit and tie that says, hey, I'm a professional, but it'll do for now. At the very least, the guests are no longer seeing his sweet cheeks as he whips up meals behind the counter, so that's a big plus. Now, with our attire taken care of for the moment, I want to focus on some new buildings, such as a research area. To improve our business, we're also going to need to improve our technological know-how, and for our very first research project, we are going to begin working on batteries. As I'm sure you can imagine, if you're staying at a hotel, and throughout the day and night the lights are randomly going off due to power surges, you probably won't have a very good time. Speaking of having a bad time, though, we are now being raided once again, this time around by a tribeswoman from the Confederacy of Benya wielding a large crossbow. A bit problematic to say the least. We started firing at her from behind the cover of our cabins, though we were hardly having any luck actually getting a shot at her. For whatever reason, she was trying to destroy the freezer in our food storage area, and then began taking cover behind the kitchen itself to fire at us with her crossbow. Because of the low visibility with the storm, I knew it would take all night for us to manage to kill her with an arrow or a bullet, so I decided to rush in with our axe and knife, which was having much more promising results, and eventually we ended up killing her. Ah yes, such a shame yet again. You could have been our waiter or something? I don't know, you're dead though. After we finished up disposing of her lifeless corpse, we ended up building ourselves a cash register in our dining room. At first I was a little bit confused, as I hadn't read what the cash register actually did, and I thought I could store money in it, but now I realize. I believe what the register does is it actually turns the room that it's in into something of a store, and we can actually designate whichever items we want to put up for sale, which will be really good, especially if we end up doing something like a gift shop, which might be in the future for us. But as for now, I think I want to put my focus into improving the quality of life for our visitors even more so, and to go about doing that, I'm going to be deconstructing the ruins of an ancient town that sat here very long ago. That way we can get plenty of stone blocks as well as concrete. As we were doing so though, we realized that the environment was unusually dry. It would seem that we're currently in a drought. This will not completely prevent us from growing crops, as we are currently growing ours in tilled soil, but it will hamper their growth just a little bit. The drought, along with the sun though, was perfect for having our asphalt roads settle quite quickly. Perhaps I should have used a little bit more concrete and or water though, as it seems to be pretty cracked, but it's much better than the dirt road that was previously here. Now this is just right around our business though, as the rest of the road coming into the area is still dirt, but we'll work on that later. For now, we have an outdoor chess table to build, that way we can ensure that our guests are having a great little recreational time. We don't currently have the research to build television, so chess it is. But we did, however, finally finish up the research for batteries, so we ended up building a pretty large battery room, that way we could store power to ensure that our facility is always getting an adequate amount of electricity. To help power our little hamlet though, I would also end up building a wooden windmill. This will also help us out. We won't have to cut down so many damn trees, as we want to use that wood that we're cutting down to build more buildings. With our research into batteries finally completed, we would also begin researching smithing, not for any particular reason, just mostly because it is a prerequisite for many other types of technologies and we kinda need it. And it would also seem that we finished up all of our new projects just in time, as we had a few more people from the Blue Rock settlements coming to rent some rooms for the night. I'm pretty pleased with the rooms that we currently have, but I began thinking, what if we get some fancy schmancy high-end guests, right? We're going to need a better room for them, something that, you know, maybe cost a little bit more, somewhere that we could put a mounted taxidermy deer head, because you guys know how much I love the vanilla taxidermy mod. So of course we began working on a deluxe cabin, one that has the walls made out of wooden fine walls instead of the classic log walls that we have been using. These have a much higher beauty stat, making it a much better room. It would come equipped with all the commodities, a double bed, end tables, a dresser, but best of all, its own little table and bar stools, that way you can eat meals or socialize with your company. In the end, I was pretty pleased with how it turned out, and it was indeed much better than the other smaller cabins that we've made thus far, and thus we could make a little bit more money on it. A $70 bed for those high rollers coming through here. Probably not an aristocrat or anything, but maybe like a kingpin drug dealer, who knows. Speaking of which, because we're going to maybe make a gift shop, I thought it might be interesting to have some different types of substances, if you will, so we ended up planting a small patch of smoke leaf. We do need to be careful though, because the RimWorld Marshal Service is not too keen on drugs or alcohol, and though we are not technically within their territory, we're kind of in a gray in-between area, there is still that chance that they might get a little upset with us. We could perhaps end up building something like a speakeasy for the Marshal citizens to come and enjoy themselves, but for the time being we're going to be building new rooms once more. 3 additional standard size rooms, as well as yet another luxury sized room. And I always enjoy putting in smaller details, such as a little park in between the 2 luxury rooms, that way everyone can sit out on the benches and maybe just kind of gander at nature a bit. Now the type of work that we've been doing does require a lot of concrete, and unfortunately there's not that many rooms on the map from the old town that sat in this territory, so we're actually going to need to build our very own concrete mixer. The mixer itself is actually used to grind down stone chunks and or other types of stony materials such as blocks if need be, and turn them into concrete. Concrete that we've been using for our asphalt roads, yes, but we've also been using them for some cobblestone pathways in between all of our rooms, that way we can ensure everyone can easily maneuver throughout our little hamlet here. However, that being said, you may notice that it seems we're currently experiencing some power issues. Well, as you might have guessed, the concrete mixer itself uses up 800 watts of power, a whole heaping shitload of power, so we're going to need to build some more wind turbines. We would quickly gather up some more steel and begin building 2 brand new wooden wind turbines to try and help us increase our power output. Technically, I could actually build some steel wind turbines, which make a little bit more power for us, but since we're going to move to a different type of power generation in the future anyhow, I don't feel like wasting the steel. As you can see, the additional 2 turbines though have us powering up the hamlet pretty well without really any issues. As we tend to some of our Thromboian tribal guests at the moment, I can't help but gander and gaze upon the beauty of our hamlet as well. I'm very proud of our little creation. And since we're doing so well here with our facilities and our rooms and everything, I thought that maybe it would be best to add in some additional plant pots and things like that to make the rooms a little bit more beautiful, and since we're kind of getting a reputation as a good hotel and or rest stop, maybe we make them just a little bit more expensive as well. well. A short period of time later though, and we had our very first visitors coming from the Marshall settlements. They appear to be a couple of peace officers from a nearby town. They seemed pretty pleasant and they ended up renting some rooms for the night. One of them sat down to play chess with Jor for a few hours, and Jor seemed extremely interested in the officers, almost as if he was trying to gather information about them. I'm sure it's probably nothing. The two of them were pretty nice, although they were also a little bit nosy, even coming behind the counter. Nonetheless, Nino would try to distract them from the fact that we were growing smoke leaf out back. Thankfully, they never ended up finding our little patch of funny-smelling tobacco. And when they decided to leave, they actually ended up leaving us 3 Glitter World medicine as a tip. Very kind of them. This will most definitely come in handy for any infections or sicknesses. For our next research project, I decided to begin working on basic climate control. Now, what this will allow us to do is create an air unit that will actually suck in outside air, and we can heat and cool it as we please and pump it into any of the structures which we choose. Basically just a very effective ventilation system. While Jor is working on the research project, I decided that Nino could go ahead and begin working on some packed dirt pathing here in the western side of our little hamlet, just as well as finishing up an upgraded version of a cabin for himself, because you know what, I think he's really earned it. We would also go ahead and build him a special little safe room, that way he'll be able to keep all of his silver safe and sound. Up until this point, we've been keeping all of our earnings inside of our freezer, which isn't exactly ideal, especially after we get more employees. Someone could begin dipping their fingers in the cookie jar, if you catch my meaning. Finally a nice home compared to the shabby shack that we did have Nino sleeping in. It's hard to believe that only a couple months ago he was sleeping out on the streets. Dreams really do come true with hard work. I also noticed that we had a few different wild men that had wandered into the area. One of them was going by the name of Lev. Since Jor has such a high animal skill, I thought we might give it a chance and try to tame him. The first attempt or two didn't really work out, but eventually we did end up having him join us. Surprisingly, even after being in the wild by himself for years, he was fairly articulate. It would seem that he used to be a veterinarian, but I'm not really sure how we winded up out in the forest wandering around. I suppose that's a tale for another time, but because of his backstory in the pet medical field, he has a really good medical skill, as well as a few other skills that are pretty proficient. Jor would have to throw together some tribal wear for him though, because he is indeed butt naked. And sure, Nino was butt naked for quite a while there, so it's not too big of a deal. We could leave Lev in the back and not have him up front cooking for customers, but right now it's fall and he could end up catching hypothermia. And I don't really feel like having to amputate his foot for frostbite. Not only does he look good in his clothing, but he looks damn good in his clothing while he's carrying massive stacks of smoke leaf. And he also looks pretty good while he's rolling up the smoke leaf blunts, of course. As you can see, this is all taking place in our battery room. As for right now, I think this is where we're going to be storing the leaves and the blunts, just trying to hide them from any unwanted eyes. I hope that you guys have some suggestions as to maybe what we should do. I'm thinking a speakeasy would be fun, but let me know if you have any suggestions. Of course though, the Marshal Service are the only ones that give a shit about us using any type of drug paraphernalia, so if we were to maybe do some other types of research into like condiments and stuff like that, we could make something like smoke leaf butter that they wouldn't exactly care about. It's kind of like hemp and hemp lotion, right? Nonetheless though, we had finally finished up our research into the basic climate control, and now that will allow us to build the airflow units like I was talking about earlier, as well as our ventilation systems. We would begin on the eastern side with all of our rentable rooms, as they are our primary concern. And for the sake of efficiency, I also went through each individual connected room like this and built in steel vents through the walls as well, so we can ensure that the airflow is properly heating up every single room. Now that we know our guests are for sure going to be properly accommodated and extremely comfortable in their warm rooms, we would also begin building a separate air ventilation system on the western side of the hamlet as well. I haven't really stated this yet, but I'm sure you can tell the western side is going to be more of residential housing and whatnot for our actual workers and Nino himself, as well as our growing zones and power generation, yada yada yada, and then the eastern side is going to be for guests. Now, whether or not we continue that as we continue growing, I'm not sure, but as for now, I really like that. But my friends, we have truly done it. We have built a little home for ourselves here, a business, and the seeds of what I hope is an empire, a financial empire, if nothing else. Perhaps some type of business empire, hotel empire, a massive chain of these kind of diners with the hotels. I'm not really sure, but I am indeed having a lot of fun, and I hope you guys are as well. This series is, of course, an extension of our Gun Empire series that just recently wrapped up a few months back. If you're not familiar with it, feel free to watch it, but I'm not exactly making this series just for that. I'm doing it to have a new series, something a little bit different that takes place in the same universe and is indeed connected, but I guess what I'm trying to say is you could and should be able to watch this series without any prior knowledge of the previous series or the expanded universe that it actually takes place in. I always say that, and I try to do that in all of my series. Sometimes I do a better job of that than others, but this series I do think you'll be able to enjoy without any prior knowledge of all the empires that have come before, but just know if you see some different references, or maybe I'm making a reference that you don't understand, that might be as to why. But if you were to be interested in this expanded universe that this series takes place in, I have a playlist on the channel. It's the RK Are You Full playlist, where it has all these series that have came before this one. But guys, if you have any suggestions for this series, things you'd like to see and stuff like that, be sure to let me know, because I would absolutely love to use all of your suggestions in this, as I always try to do, like with the Gun Empire series and the others as well. But I love you guys. I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.